Good evening and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm John Matisonn. With the Christmas season coming and it's book buying season, we're going to be talking to some authors and about books that have just come out. And with corruption in the news so much, it seems appropriate that tonight we're going to be talking to Paul Hoffman. Paul is the founder of Accountability Now, the anti-corruption NGO. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Well,
first question for you, Paul, is a little bit about Accountability Now. You have Archbishop Tutu as your patron. What is the Anglican Church involvement and connection to Accountability Now?
Well, I'm one of those unfortunates who went to an Anglican private school, so I had the Christian religion thoroughly rammed home when I was a teenager, but it didn't put me off. And when we started the NGO, one of the cases that we were involved in is the arms deal case.
Yes.
And Terry Crawford Brown has been working on that for the best part of 20 years. So being an opportunist, I said, you're close to Archbishop Tutu. He'd been working on banking sanctions in New York with him in the 80s. How about putting in a good word for us? And he said, you can put in your own good word. And I approached the Archbishop and he said, we'll see. But after we'd had some success, quite on his own, he came and he said, I'm ready to be your patron, which is a great feather in our cap. We're very pleased to have him as our patron.
So the Anglican Church has had a role in both the arms deal opposition with Terry Crawford Brown and the other corruption issues that have been fought over these last years.
I think that the Anglican Church was probably the voice of morality and of reason all through the apartheid era.
Well, one of them.
Yes. Perhaps one of the more proactive ones.
Yes,
and
sure.
I think in the Anglican Church, we lost our voice a little after 94.
Yes.
But now we're finding it again. And of course, Archbishop Tutu never lost his voice. He has been a beacon of ethics and morality throughout. And obviously, accountability complements that kind of sentiment.
Now, before we go to the current issues in your book, since you've been following corruption so closely, how would you compare corruption now with the apartheid era? There was obviously plenty of corruption in the apartheid era. Was it worse or better?
Well, I think it's quite hard to tell. We're still waiting for the Public Protector's report on the CIEX matter. When the New South Africa dawned, a contractor was engaged by the New South Africa, by the National Intelligence Agency, to look into recovering money that had been stolen in the dying days of apartheid, and produced a very interesting report that when I first read it, I thought this is a work of fiction. Cabinet ministers disappearing with large suitcases full of banknotes, and that's obviously we all knew about the lifeboats that were given to the Afrikaner banks. But all of that is evidence of malfeasance and corruption in the old South Africa.
But we don't know very much about that. Why not?
Well, it's because we're waiting for the Public Protector's report. You see, once I'd satisfied myself that the CIEX report.
What is CIEX?
It's an organization run by Michael Oatley, who is a former MI6 spy who was negotiating with the Irish Republican Army on behalf of Maggie Thatcher at a time when Maggie Thatcher was publicly saying, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
Right. Now, he
wrote that report. Yeah.
And he was hired by
Billy Masetla, yes,
as South African head DG of intelligence.
Correct.
And he did this report, and in a quick word, what is it?
In a nutshell, he was looking for a cut to recover for the New South Africa public money that had been stolen in the old South Africa.
Any idea what sort of size?
Well, it's in the billions, many billions. The lifeboat deals, if you add in the interest,
that was to the banks.
Yes, that is in the ballpark of 10 billion rand.
And can people read this report? Is it available?
Yes, it is, and it is going to be reported on by the Public Protector's Office, because what we did when we got wind of the fact that the new South
You
African...
mean you as accountability?
Yes, yeah. As Accountability Now, we we were given this report, and once we had verified that it was a genuine report by a real person, we took it to the public protector and we said to her, look, we know that you've got no mandate to look into what happened during apartheid, but you do have a mandate to find out why, as a matter of good administration, this contract was cancelled rather than carried through to fruition.
Now, this ties in with the report that Sylvia Vollenhoven did for the SABC on the same subject. We had her on our very first show on Between the Lines. And of course, the SABC then suppressed that report, that program, and has actually given her a hard time to prevent her remaking it.
She's litigated over that.
That's right. But now, what is going to happen? The public protector hasn't made much progress.
No, the public protector is in the last lap. In fact, we were promised the public protector's report before the retirement of Advocate Paul Hoffman, but there was a slip twixt cup and lip, and that report should come out in the next few months.
But so there was a problem. She had a problem of resources, which
Correct,
is well known.
yeah.
But now the new public protector, who has yet to prove herself, to put it kindly, why do you think she's going to produce a fulsome report?
Well, because so much work has gone into it, and we're the complainant. We're not going to go away.
And then finally, just lastly on that subject, it does appear, and you're going to have to answer this briefly. It does appear that the new government seems to have, the ANC government seems to have an interest in not letting that report out about what the apartheid government did.
Yes, no, it might have been a question of reconciliation at that time. It was a Mandela cabinet decision to just leave it alone. And
we're going to have to take a break.
Waiting.
When we come back, we're going to talk about Nkandla and many other more current issues. And we're back talking to Paul Hoffman, who's just written Confronting the Corrupt, Accountability Now's Battle Against Graft in South Africa. Now, Paul, I want to go on to your more recent work, which is written about in the book. And I want to start with the Scorpions. What happened? The Scorpions was dissolved by Jacob Zuma.
Correct.
And you took action to try and bring it back.
Well, in fairness, I think the Glenister case was started at a time before Accountability Now was formed, and in his first approach to the Constitutional Court, he was told, "You're premature, give Parliament and the Executive an opportunity of considering the ANC's Polokwane resolution, which called for the urgent disbanding of the Scorpions and the creation of the Hawks."
Yes.
And in that first round, Glenister, who was represented by other people, was told, if you're not happy with the product of what Parliament and the executive branch of government do, you can always come back. And as we all know, the Scorpions were dissolved, and I then got an instruction from Mr. Glenister to carry on, and having paid for his ticket, he was going to go and see the show. And that's what happened.
Now, I have one quote from your book just a piece of information, some figures. While the Scorpions in the years 2007 and 8 seized goods valued at more than 4 billion rand, the following year, under the Hawks, they seized goods valued at 35 million. So a tiny fraction.
Yes.
So that is one suggestion, and you would argue that that's correct.
Well,
that the Hawks have done nothing like what
the Hawks have gone from bad to worst. In their first year, they effected 15,000 arrests. In their last year, with a full year of available figures, they did 5,000 arrests. their conviction rate has dwindled as well. They are not an efficient and effective anti-corruption entity, which is one of the reasons why this book has been written.
And so you won a case, but then the Hawks came along. They haven't done very much. How's that ended, briefly?
The Hawks are dysfunctional, and the Parliamentary Constitutional Review Committee is looking at our suggestion that the best way to comply with the judgments of the Constitutional Court in the litigation around the Hawks is to create an integrity commission that has fulsome compliance with the 5 criteria: specialization, training, independence, guaranteed resources, and security of tenure of office, which we like to call STIRS because we are stirrers.
But so far that hasn't happened. You have the Hawks, as you're saying, they've gone from bad to worse. So legal remedies haven't really worked.
No, it is correct that the Constitutional Court was not prepared to, in the second, well, it's actually the third Glenister case, the second one that we did, we asked the Constitutional Court to tell government to move the Hawks out of the police. Our point is you cannot be independent
if you're under the police.
If you're under the police, and you cannot really get guaranteed resourcing or security of tenure. And they're not even specialized. The Hawks are the priority crime investigation unit, and they do all sorts of things, including corruption, but not enough on corruption. So our approach is, if you create an integrity commission as a Chapter 9 institution, which brings with it a whole lot of constitutional protection that the Hawks just don't have because they are a creature of statute, not a constitutional body, you will get yourself into a situation where you are properly armed to deal with the corrupt. If you don't have anti-corruption machinery of state that is effective and independent, you're not going to win in the battle against corruption. And as we all know, even the Constitutional Court said this, corruption is rife in the new South Africa.
Right. And what we also know is that being under the police is not, from your point of view, ideal anyway. But we've had one police commissioner after another who's been a political appointee or non-police expert. And that started with Jackie Celebi's appointment under President Thabo Mbeki.
Correct. Celebi was locked up for 15 years for corruption. His successor, Bheki Cele, was dismissed because he didn't think there was anything wrong with paying triple the rental for police headquarters, triple over the going rate. And we all know that Ria Pierga made a complete mess of Marikana and is facing a board of inquiry at the moment.
And Cele is now back in government as a minister.
Well, that is a great sadness. He should actually be locked up for corruption and for fraud in that deal.
You're not worried about defamation in saying that?
No, I'm not at all. He must bring it on.
Yeah. And you are a senior counsel who's had defamation experience?
Yes, a little.
Well, we'll have to give it, he's welcome to come on the show and respond, and we would definitely invite him to do that. But in the meanwhile, I want to move on to Nkandla. Can you explain briefly what your role was in Nkandla?
Yes, we were not in the litigation itself.
Yes.
We obviously kept a beady eye on what was going on. And I remember so vividly the way that the Chief Justice said that what Jacob Zuma would have to pay for was limited to the 5 items only.
Yes.
Having said that...
The non-security upgrades, so-called.
Yeah.
Yes.
Having said that the Public Protector's report is binding and enforceable.
Right.
The problem is that those 5 items, the pool and the cattle kraal and the chicken run and the visitor centre and the amphitheatre, are but a small fraction of the non-security upgrades that have actually taken place at Nkandla. And we are concerned that President Zuma has got off very lightly at 7.8 million, when even at best for him, if 155 million is recovered from his architect, the architect has been sued for 155 million, then there is still 81 million unaccounted for. and it's not all been spent on security upgrades.
And my understanding was that Thuli Madonsela, as public protector, she was quite kind in her report. She didn't say President Zuma must pay back everything. She said he must pay back a proportion, and that was to be determined by Treasury, and Treasury said 7.8 million, which was a modest amount of the 246 million spent.
No. Well, what her report says is that he must pay back a reasonable amount in respect of all of the non-security upgrades. And obviously they overspent on everything. So she's only, the way that she was kind was to say just a reasonable amount back, because the overspending can be recovered from the architect who allowed the overspending to happen. But the problem is that we're facing now is that the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land, has made an order which is palpably incorrect and needs to be corrected.
We have to take a break. Corruption is such a big subject. We'll be right back with Paul Hoffman. And we're back talking to Advocate Paul Hoffman about his new book, Confronting the Corrupt. Paul, we were talking about the Hawks, and we were talking about Nkandla. I wanted to just go on to a different subject now. You've also taken on the bread cartel.
Yes, that's a very interesting matter, and in fact, probably our greatest success. And pleased to say that there was no government involvement. In fact, the competition authorities helped a lot to get the people who were wronged put in a position that they would have been in had they not been wronged by the cartel.
And what was the issue? A cartel means that the bread manufacturers were coming together to keep the bread price up.
What they did is they colluded to increase the bread price and decrease the commissions of the agents who were distributing bread. And that was found to be a cartel, and that collusive activity is a form of corruption and fraud.
Does that mean that the bread price went down?
It did, and the cartel was actually dealt with very efficiently by government. But the damages aspect of it led to very complex litigation by consumers of bread on the one hand and distributors of bread on the other hand. And we came in it acting for Imran Mukadam, who's not unknown in this building, to put to rights what had been done wrong to the distributors.
And just in numbers for the ordinary consumer, how much did bread come down in price?
I think it was, in effect, it was 2 slices of bread per loaf. That's how much it came down. And, when you, in an informal settlement and a loaf of bread is a loaf of bread, it's...
Absolutely. That is exactly what a democratic government should be doing. So I want to go on to the Panama Papers, in which came out, it was a leak out of the Caribbean, out of Panama, obviously, and the law firm Mossack Fonseca. There was a reference in there to someone in the Zuma family.
Yes, the largest member of the Zuma family, I think his name is Kulabashi Zuma.
Right.
And it had to
Nephew of the president.
Nephew, and it had to do with dubious dealings in the DRC, in the mining sector.
In the Congo.
Yes.
And how did that become relevant here?
Well, I think that it is symptomatic of the extent of the nepotism in the Zuma family. And we know that Zuma's own son is in business with the Guptas, and we know...
In a very substantial way.
Correct. And that we know that the Guptas are really on the receiving end of the state of capture report that has belatedly been published as the swan song of Thuli Madonsela.
Now, I did want to, before we leave the Hawks entirely, and we're not going to have much more time, I wanted to understand, because it's so hard for the ordinary person to keep on top of all of these developments, they happen so fast, and so many of them. Anwar Dramat, where does he fit in? He became head of the Hawks,
Yes.
and then he fell out with the authorities, and they pushed him out.
What happened was, Anwar Dramat was a deployed cadre who was
So he
made
came out of the
general.
ANC.
Correct. He was in MK on the Cape Flats in the bad old days.
Okay,
And he was appointed as the first head of the Hawks
right,
under the initial Hawks legislation.
right.
And he was kept away from the Nkandla dockets. We
Right.
have complained about criminality in Nkandla's contracting. So have the EFF a couple of months later, and the DA.
Right.
And those complaints ought to have been given to the Hawks, but weren't. They were retained at police headquarters. When we went back to court for the last time in relation to the Hawks, the court said, this is nonsense. General Dramat must choose his cases. He tried to get the Nkandla dockets, and what he got was a suspension letter, and he was hounded out.
In a nutshell, so he was an ANC deployee who wanted to do his job honestly, deal with the Nkandla matter as was his required.
He got on the wrong side.
He got
of
on
the
the wrong
faction.
side, and they pushed him out.
Correct.
And that's the end of his role.
Well, he's now facing criminal charges which won't fly, of being involved in that kidnapping case where Robert
Rendition.
McBride has already got off. Yeah.
Which, yes, looked highly questionable. Finally, before we run out of time entirely, what is the president's legal costs cost you and I as taxpayers, the public as taxpayers?
Yes. I know in this latest round, which is to do with his interdict on the...
to try and stop the public protector's report.
Yes. That one, there's an argument that he must pay out of his own pocket, and
Right.
he's been given 7 days to say why he shouldn't
there will
pay
be a
out.
judgment.
But everything else that he's done, and this is Nkandla, the spy tapes case, and a lot of other cases about him not doing his job properly, like the DA trying to force him to suspend officials who need to be suspended, and now FUL and Helen Suzman Foundation seeking to get him to suspend Sean Abrams. We're looking at tens of millions of rands. It is really a very big number.
And in most of these cases, he loses them.
He loses every case. He hasn't won yet.
And this is what they call the Stalingrad strategy, that what he's doing is really kicking for touch,
Yeah.
saving time.
He's fighting it street by street because...
but losing every street.
yeah.
And so that's, you say, tens of millions of
Yes.
rands. In cases that, would it be fair to say, are actually frivolous?
Yes, well, in the spy tapes case, his counsel stood up in the Supreme Court of Appeal and said, well, actually, we haven't got a defense. His own counsel. In the Nkandla matter, Jeremy Gauntlet stood up and said, we surrender.
And in the public protector case that was very recent...
It was withdrawn.
It was withdrawn, which is the same as saying we
Yes.
have no case. Wow, that's quite something. The level of waste and damage is...
Well, you
is
could
considerable.
build a lot of houses with the money that has been spent on unnecessary litigation in this administration.
And the lawyers, I mean, obviously some of the legal costs really accrue to the state attorney's office, because sometimes he's using state lawyers or government-paid lawyers. But are they telling him that he has no chance, or are they not giving him good legal advice?
I think that there is a tendency to tell cabinet ministers in general, and certainly the president, what they want to hear. And that's an unfortunate tendency, because it does lead to a wasteful expenditure on litigation, and it also incurs long delays. I would like to see the court saying, this kind of case, politically loaded case, must find its way through the system in 6 months. We don't care how you do it. You can come and see us on a Saturday if you have to.
But also that it's frivolous, and therefore the individual must pay.
It will go away if costs awards out of the individual's pocket occur. And if matters are dealt with less delay.
Private money will be treated with more respect than public money.
Yes.
That's all we have time for. Thank you, Paul, for coming. The book is Confronting the Corrupt, Accountability Now's Battle Against Graft in South Africa. Well, that's all we have time for. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Good night and happy reading.